You learned to read the room before you learned to read a book. You knew exactly what mood someone was in the second they walked through the door. You adjusted. You made yourself smaller or more helpful or completely invisible depending on what the room needed. Nobody taught you that. Nobody had to. And the strange part, you're still doing it right now. In every room you walk into. That's not empathy. That's not intuition. Scientists have a completely different name for what you trained yourself to do, and once you hear it, you'll never look at your childhood the same way again. Most people assume that being ignored as a child just makes you shy. Maybe a little insecure. Maybe someone who needs a bit more reassurance than others. But that's not what the research shows. Psychologists have a name for what actually happens. It's called emotional parentification, and it has nothing to do with shyness. Emotional parentification is what occurs when a child's emotional needs go consistently unmet, so the child stops expressing needs altogether and starts meeting everyone else's instead. The child essentially becomes the emotional caretaker of the adults around them. Think of it this way: a plant that doesn't get water doesn't just stop growing, it restructures itself. It sends roots sideways deeper anywhere it can find moisture. It adapts its entire architecture around the absence. That's what your nervous system did. It didn't shut down, it reorganized around the gap. You didn't grow up in a house that was obviously broken. That's what makes this so hard to name. Maybe the lights were on, maybe dinner was on the table, maybe nobody hit anyone. From the outside, everything looked fine, but there was something missing that you could never quite point to. The adults in your house were present but not available. They were in the room but they weren't there. Not for the things that mattered. Not for the moment you came home with something exciting and the energy in the room didn't shift at all. Not for the nights something scared you and you learned quietly that bringing it up made things harder, not easier. So your nervous system made a decision. A very intelligent, very logical decision. If my needs create problems, I'll stop having needs. And then something else happened. Because the emotional space in that house still existed, someone had to fill it. And you were there. You were perceptive. You were sensitive. So without anyone asking, you became the one who noticed when the tension was rising. You became the one who made the joke that broke it. You became the one who checked on everyone else because checking on yourself had already proven to be a dead end. Neuroscience tells us that children raised in emotionally unavailable environments show measurably higher activity in the brain's social monitoring systems, the parts responsible for reading faces, detecting mood shifts, anticipating needs. Not because they were born that way, because they trained those systems every single day out of survival. And here's the line that took a long time to understand. Your brain made a very smart decision with the information it had at the time, and smart decisions don't always look comfortable from the outside. Here's the part nobody says out loud. You became incredibly easy to take advantage of, not because you're naive, because you were trained before you were old enough to consent to the training, to prioritize other people's emotional states over your own. So you end up in friendships where you do most of the emotional labor, relationships where you're the one who always notices, always adjusts, always makes it work, and you don't complain, because complaining was never an option you were given. There are moments late at night usually where you realize you have no idea what you actually want, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, unsettling way, like someone asking you your favorite song and your mind going completely blank. You've spent so long tuning into everyone else's frequency that you're not entirely sure what yours sounds like anymore. And the cruelest part, people call it a gift. They say you're so easy to be around, so understanding, so giving, and you smile. Because you were also trained to do that. The cost isn't visible, that's why it never gets named, but it deserves to be said out loud. Carrying everyone else's emotions while quietly abandoning your own is exhausting in a way that sleep doesn't fix. And here's the bridge. The cost and the gift are not separate things. They come from the exact same place, and understanding that changes everything about what comes next. Here's what you actually became. You became the person who notices the one in the room who's struggling before they say a word. You walk into a conversation and within 30 seconds you know who's performing, who's hiding something, and who's about to break. Not because you're guessing, because you've been reading those signals since you were 6 years old. You've had 2 decades of practice that most people never get. You became someone who makes people feel seen, genuinely seen, not flattered seen. That is one of the rarest things one human being can offer another. Most people go their entire lives without meeting someone who does it the way you do. And there is something else, something more specific. People who grew up being ignored develop an almost surgical ability to identify what actually matters in a situation because they had to. When you're a child filtering out noise to find the signal that tells you whether today is safe or not, you get very good at finding what's real underneath what's performed. That skill doesn't leave you, it grows. In a world where most people are too busy talking to listen, you listen in a way that changes people. You retain things about them they forgot they told you. You follow up. You notice the shift. That is not a small thing. That is the thing people spend their entire lives searching for in another person. You didn't choose to become the person who holds everyone else together, but you did it, and you did it so well that most people never once thought to ask who was holding you. That question has an answer, and learning it is the whole point of what comes next. The next video goes into something that almost no one talks about: what happens inside the nervous system of someone who learned to need nothing, and why when that person finally allows themselves to need something, everything changes.